Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Marie. I'm one of the committee members of Effective Altruism Oxford. Today's event is a little bit different than usual. We usually have a speaker, but today we have 4 speakers and a moderator. So we'll be doing a panel discussion with volunteers from One Day Sooner. So I'm really excited to see how that goes. And thank you all so much for coming. So yeah, as you all will have noticed by now, we're live streaming the event, so just so you know, if you're asking questions or anything, it will be on the live stream. If you don't want to be on the live stream, don't ask questions. That's the way it is. So Danica will be explaining how it's all going to work in a second. Before that, I'm just going to give a really quick introduction to Effective Altruism, because I know there's a few people who are here for the first event. So if you're now sitting and wondering, what is this effective altruism thing? I'm going to try and give you a brief. So we can sort of boil it down to 2 different concepts. The first is asking the question, how can we use our resources to help others the most? I think many of us here feel a pull to help other people. We know we live in a world where there's preventable suffering and injustice happening every day, and we want to do something about that. But we only have so much time, money, and energy, and the reality is that we can only focus on a small number of problems without limited resources. So effective altruism is about recognizing that what we choose to do with that time, money, energy is really important if we want to help others as much as we can. So we believe that if we carefully consider our options and use the best evidence we have, we can potentially help 10, 100, 1,000 times or more as many people, individuals who have hopes and dreams and friends and joys like we all do. So effective altruism is interested in questions like what global problems are most pressing, what solutions to them actually work, what does it mean to help others in the first place, and how can you use your unique skills to make a difference. So these are obviously extremely hard questions. But sort of the insight of effective altruism is that given how much is at stake, it's really worth trying to think carefully about the right answers to these questions. Of course, it's no use just answering these questions without the second component of effective altruism, which is actually doing some stuff. There's lots of different organizations that should be, they're here, who sort of work based on effective altruism principles that are, making a real difference in the world, working on areas like, health in the world's poorest countries, animal welfare, safeguarding humanity against big threats like pandemics or nuclear war or new technologies like artificial intelligence. We think one of the best things you can do as a student is to spend some time thinking about how you can use your career to have an impact. 80,000 Hours, which is over there, is an organization that gives career advice to people who want to make social impact one of the key priorities in their career. And of course, another thing you can do, if you're interested in learning more about all this, is you can get involved with Effective Altruism Oxford. We run events all day, every Tuesday. You can see sort of the rough schedule here. So there's always this all-day co-working and a speaker event in the evening, followed by pizza and some other events. So you can see all those events at eaoxford.com. You're also welcome to come to speak to one of us people in nice t-shirts if you want to hear more about the events. One thing I should mention is that we have an EA Oxford research program, and sign-ups are closing at the end of the week. This is a program where you can get to do a research project on a topic related to effective altruism, together with a postgraduate or master's mentor who can help you with this project. So if you're interested in that, sign-ups are by the end of this week. There's a link to it in the newsletter. You can also talk to Gideon over there if you have questions or want to sign up. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand it over to Danica now.
So, hi guys. Huge thank you again to EA Oxford for having us. Like Marie said, my name is Danica and I'm the Deputy UK Chapter Manager for One Day Sooner. So One Day Sooner is a non-profit organisation where we aim to advocate for the voice of human challenge trial volunteers, and we highly value the use of open debate to inform researchers, policymakers and members of the public about the ethics, risks and benefits regarding human challenge trials. So First things first, what are human challenge trials? Human challenge trials are a specific type of medical trial that involves intentionally infecting volunteers with a disease in order to learn more about it, or perhaps to test vaccines or treatments against this. Now, we are speaking to an EA audience, so I imagine the majority of you will be thinking, yep, sure, sounds good, sign me up, potentially. But actually, the wider public tends to be against this type of thing. You have the debate of, well, why put yourself at risk for such trials? Now, with me today, I have 4 people who have actually volunteered for these trials and have been deliberately infected with COVID-19. So, my aim for this event is to discuss whether they believe the risk that they have put themselves in was worth it. And I want to understand their decision-making process and explore what you would argue are the main principles or requirements for an effective high-risk, high-reward trial. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have 2 volunteers from the Imperial College COVID study, and we have 2 volunteers from the Oxford reinfection study. Would be Alistair and Jacob?
Yeah, so I'm Alistair. Hi, I was UK chapter manager for One Day Senior. I was UK chapter manager for One Day Senior for most of 2020 and 2021. I was in the study when in its 2nd earliest cohort back in March of 2021. And I'm now at UCL doing biomedicine. I'm at the EA Society there, so that's what I do. I'm also still part of Altruism.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jacob. Again, I was part of the Imperial COVID study, but Alistair was part of the bench as well. I was part of the first cohort at the start of March, and I was actually the first person globally to be directly infected with coronavirus as part of the study, which is a tagline I love to say in this sort of thing. So, again, yeah, for myself now, I'm currently working for Citizens Advice. Other than that, I'm not really doing much, but I've really got involved heavily in volunteering with One Day Sooner, and an active volunteer in the work and the advocacy they do for these sort of trials and what they can do. So you can discuss more about
The study?
our Imperial study itself in comparison to the Oxford one that we were compared to.
Yeah, so an essential component to running a challenge program is to find the kind of minimum dose that you need to actually infect a human. There's no way to work this out on paper. You actually have to infect people. Viruses behave in very different ways, and you just have to find a minimum dose. So they essentially take a small cohort of people. So this was Jacob's cohort, which was 3 people, and they started with a very small dose. And in fact, they got they infected 2 out of 3 of them, which is a bit of a surprise. So they began.
The dose they thought would just be the baseline to rule out nothing similar. Turned out to be, rather like that just in the first thought. And I suppose there's more to say, but I suppose one of the key differences between the Imperial study we was in and the Oxford study they take part in is that, for at least for us, and this was just due to the timing that take place and the nature of the pandemic at the point. Ours was solely, had no previous signs of infection, COVID. I've got the word now. COVID negative. Seronegative. That's it. Thank you. To COVID infection. So there's a part of the pre-screen you went to. Obviously, the main thing we were looking for is there had been no sign at all of any form of COVID infection prior to actually being able to take part into the trial. To the extent where the day we went down into trial, we had a taxi pick us up from our homes to take us down to things, and we weren't even risking getting on public transport in case we caught it about like hour or so from our homes down to the hospital where we were quarantined. So it was very interesting in that sense.
So like I said, they infect you with a controlled dose of the virus. Then once you're there, it's a great opportunity to do a lot of data. So they grabbed a lot of blood. They do a lot of swabs. Hell of a lot of swabs.
A lot of blood.
But you spend a lot of time having medical stuff done to you. So they take a lot of blood. They take a lot of swabs. The results, the first tranche of results just came out. We're still actually in the study, technically speaking. We have.
My participation ends on the 3rd, as that's my final follow-up appointment, where we go down again and they take again bloods. They did a similar test they did on our daily quarantines there.
Yeah, so we followed up for a whole year afterwards, which is quite unusual. Normally, past about 28 days, most studies don't really bother. So it's a really long study. So they take a lot of data. The first tranche of data just got released, which was some of the immunology stuff, but some evaluation of lateral flow tests, which was really interesting, and some basic data just about the virus behaviour in a human, which was all really interesting stuff. So they captured a lot of data as well, which is the other kind of purpose of doing a study like that in a controlled environment, is you can get loads of data. And the other thing is that when you deliberately infect a young person, especially for the first 24, 48 hours, they just don't notice, and it's really difficult because you never actually know. It's very rare to put a timestamp on, this person was infected X, Y, Z. It's almost impossible to do that in the community. And then once it's done in the community, particularly with young people who are likely to just basically have a cold or be asymptomatic, it's really difficult to look at what happens. So the kind of data from the town study was really the first time that anyone had a good look at how infection establishes itself in young people, so how the virus climbs up over time, how the immune response ramps up over time, and also kind of what will be happening is what kinds of people were susceptible and what people didn't, because in the end, the dose we had infected pretty much, it was about 52% of participants was the actual number. So what are the differences between the 50% who were infected and the 50% who aren't infected? We don't know, but it'd be really good to find out. So that's kind of some of the other aims of the study. Once you have a minimum dose, you can then go on and do vaccine studies or antiviral studies. You can do lots of things. When you are prepared to deliberately infect someone, you can do a lot of testing that you would be almost impossible to do now in the community. So those are kind of the aims of the study, reasons why it was done. Obviously that's a bit of a broad overview. There are a lot more specific things, and there are also some things challenge studies definitely aren't good for, but that's a broad overview.
Cool, cheers guys. So I guess I'll start with sort of an introduction myself, and then we'll kind of dive into sort of the differences around the Oxford University study. So my name's Paresh. My background is I've kind of got a mathematical degree, and I'm currently working in project management for a UK-based insurance and investments company. So that's kind of me. I won't go into any more without boring you. The Oxford study that Paul and I both took part in was different to the Imperial study in the sense of it was a reinfection study. So the participants they were looking for were those who had previously been infected with COVID-19. So for me, I was infected in October 2020. The symptoms I had at the time were just the lack of smell and taste, and the study for me started in earnest in kind of May 2021, and not to sort of Jacob's strap line, mine is a bit less, it's a bit weaker, but mine is that I was the first person within the Oxford study to be reinfected with COVID, so something I'll still whack out, but maybe not when you're there to put your strap line out there. So a bit more about the study was that, obviously, like I said, it was kind of a reinfection study with the main purpose to test immunity response. So kind of to analyse results on participants to see how people's immunity responded to trying to overcome an infection that they'd already previously overcome. One of the main aims of the study, once the immunity response was analysed, was to almost try and develop a blood test that could be used kind of future years to try and detect whether a participant or a subject would be affected by COVID-19 or not. We'll come on to it a little bit later on, but the results from the Oxford University study are still pending, if you like. And I think the last thing I'll kind of cover off before I hand over to Paul is just some of the logistics around the COVID-19 trial that we did. So it started with kind of an online Zoom with one of the study doctors, just to kind of do a bit of introductions, walk you through the risks, again, so that participants are always ultimately kept informed of what they're getting into, so they've got all the information at hand to decide whether you want to participate or not. And then following that, there was a trip down to Oxford, some pre-screening tests, so sort of pulmonary lung function tests, MRIs, blood tests, that kind of stuff. And then following that, the quarantine unit phase itself was 17 days locked in a single room in the John Ratcliffe Hospital, which was interesting, especially for the period I was in there, because it was extremely sunny and about 28 degrees, and I had a wide view of the front of the hospital, looking at everybody in shorts and t-shirts.
Yeah, Yeah, that's actually a good point. So I'm Paul. I'm doing a PhD here in Oxford. I'm just in DPAC, basically 400 meters from here, so I had it quite quick to get here. Because my background is in research and I did a cognitive science undergrad degree, and we always had to participate in studies. Basically, you get into that. But of course, different types of studies, more like you sit on a rotating chair and say like which angle you think it turned to while being blindfolded, that kind of stuff. But that's kind of how it all started and how I got into it. And now, over the last 10 years, I've participated in probably more than 15 studies or so. And they got more and more, I'd say, serious, and that I think their impact also got more important. So within the last couple of years, I've also done a malaria challenge trial. I've participated in a metabolism study that was quite intense, and I've also donated bone marrow. And so this was basically my last adventure. I was quite a bit later, so I was just reinfected. Actually, I wasn't infected, so I got lucky. But they tried to reinfect me in June last summer. So that's relatively recent. I just thought it was funny that you got reinfected in October, because that was when I initially got my first round of COVID in a not clinical environment. So yeah, I think some things that were a bit different for me is because I was in a later cohort, was that a lot of things that were quite unpleasant during the study were dropped because they turned out not to be that informative, and they were associated with quite a lot of discomfort, like very deep nasal swabs. I think you still had to do them every day, I just every second day, so that was kind of nice for me. And at the risk of just dropping more salt in the wound, but it turns out also that the Oxford study seemed to be a lot more nice in many other ways. So, for example, we were allowed coffee.
We were.
That sounds a basic nature, but trust me, when you're locked in a room for 17 days, small things like that other people in other studies don't yet make you realise it's quite an important thing.
Yeah. So there was an interesting, you were allowed decaf coffee, there was an interesting moment, day 10, I lost my smell and taste. And you had to call nurses in to get coffee, and I kind of realised that I couldn't taste it, so I just drank hot water for about 3 days and just didn't tell them it worked fine.
So yeah, a typical day was not as harsh for me, I think, as for everyone else here on the table. So basically you would be woken up around 7 AM, then they just take your observations, maybe some bloods, different swabs, temperature, heart rate, these kind of things. Then at some point you'd have to do a cognitive test, which is, by my opinion, the most annoying thing. I'd rather have blood taken because it took quite long and it's really exhausting mentally, especially like after lunch when you just get a bit tired, but you have to force yourself through it. Yeah, at some point you get lunch, and then some more observations. So they were taken, I think, 5 times a day for me. Was four. And otherwise I just took in a computer, extra screen, and tried to work, because I thought like, okay, I get some time off from everything else, I can make this like effective and try my best here to kind of make this an interesting experience. They also let me take my exercise bike, which I think was quite interesting and nice, and I think they wouldn't have let you do it. So I just thought, okay, if I'm here, let's make most of it. And everyone was absolutely lovely. I think there's something worth mentioning also, which I don't know how your experience was about that. If you want to say something.
No, just I think we should just again quickly describe how the actual process of ours day to day. So basically, I mean, it overlapped in a lot of ways. So we had a lot of similar tests in terms of we were woken up. I mean, I got woken up around 6, so it wasn't quite as much. But again, we got woken up and we instantly did nasal swabs, and then. As soon as we woke up as well, so even after lunch, even with a little bit different, we had to do a kind of test in the morning. Yeah. So you had this iPad with like a brain trainer-like game that took like half an hour to complete, and then you just shattered because you just didn't got woken up at 6 and you didn't go to bed at 11. And trying to like not pass. Dread to think what my results are of that. Anyway, and then we did that, and then we had breakfast, and at least for me, they alternated whether took blood before or after breakfast each day, I think, to try and get different things. Me.
I didn't notice.
They did that, so we got bloods early as well. And then, routinely from then, it was like just constant, I'd say at least an hour, every hour or so, we did different sort of tests. So we obviously had the general wellbeing tests, so the ECG, the heart rate, and the respiratory rate. We've done 4 times a day, broken up a few hours, and in between that we had 2 nasal swabs daily, I believe, the spirometry, and the FOT, which I can't remember what that stands for, but the one you put in your howdy.
Breathing tests.
The breathing test, basically, yeah. I believe that was it. And so between those times, really, again, it was just filling the gaps, but like we weren't allowed the luxuries of like bringing exercise bikes in. I basically got my laptop in, and that was about as much as you got. We did have a TV, the PlayStation, which was really fun because I had a couple of games on there. I remember as well, like the only game I had was either Sims or like was Ratchet and Clank one, which I loved as a kid. And I was playing this game for my study, and like the doctors kept coming in, and be like, "Have you not completed this yet?" It's literally for like 6-year-olds. I was like, "I'm busy, like you know, in the study." And I didn't. I finished it literally to the last day, and I had to stay longer as well. So it's lucky I did. And then yeah, other than that, I mean, you guys were allowed to order food as well, weren't you, for like an Ocado?
Oh yeah, we had a great Ocado snack box.
Yeah.
That's it. Kept getting refilled. I mean, honestly, when I went in, obviously, you know, they take a lot of measurements, including weight. I genuinely thought, not doing loads of exercise whilst in there, and the amount of Ocado snack box items I went, I thought, there's no way I'm going to come out lighter. And I did. God knows how, because, yeah, like these guys, we just kept getting topped up, and the nurses were like, take more. I was like, no. And he was kind of forced, take more. I was like, okay.
So we had a list about 3 different cup crisps and about 3 different other biscuits we could choose from, and that stayed the same for our stay. And there was like snacks, and then the food wasn't too bad.
Well, I had the vegetarian menu was about that long. And then towards the end, I got put on a low carb diet, which meant they essentially took anything good and replaced it with forest. I had to eat that for about 3 days. So depressing.
But yeah.
Okay, before we go on a lot more about food, which was definitely the aim of this event, does anybody have any questions about One Day Sooner or Human Challenge Trials in general before we move on? No? Okay. Brilliant. Live stream's on a delay, so if you have any questions, I'll get there eventually. Apologies. So I'm going to start with some of my own questions, and then hopefully that'll inspire you guys to have your own questions for the panelists, and we can go from there. Feel free to stick around at any point for a question. So the first question I have for you guys is, what were your motivations for volunteering in the first place? We can start getting slowly away from me.
Okay. So of course there's a bunch of things that go in there. I think I'll just focus on 1 or 2 points because I think everyone has to say something. And there was that first of all I think it's a valuable way to spend time that way, because obviously it's quite rewarding if you think it could be important in some way. I think there's an egoistic note to it here, because I like to think of myself as a little bit of a collector of interesting experiences. And I see it that way. If you look back on your last year, which kind of times would you really remember, and what would be like, you know, something that you could talk about, that you'd like to remember, where you think you might have grown as a person also. And I personally think like being stuck in a room for 17 days in best summer and just not being allowed to go out, what would that do to me? I honestly was intrigued by that question just as much as by the idea that it's nice to help. So I think there was a little bit of a adventure side for me, which I think is probably not something many people think about before they do this. So I think for me the highest cost also associated with this is not that I was at risk, that like of course somehow, but then you do the quick math and think about just like 1 of 1,000 people dies in a traffic collision. So my chance of dying in a traffic collision in a quarter of a year is about as high as the 1 to 300,000 that they gave me as a figure for the study. So what I really thought is my cost here that I that I give as like my thing is my time to be stuck in a room for that long and having to deal with that and having unpleasant things done to you. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think that this was a bigger experience than I would probably have had if I would just have done whatever I would have done in normal 2 weeks of my time. It's just, of course I have other reasons as well, but maybe it's one more unique feature.
Yes, cheers. So I think probably my main motivation for kind of participating was almost like a gut feel that I felt almost like compelled that I should be doing it. So kind of the way I was first introduced to the study was, I think it was a one-day article via track and trace email after I'd had COVID, and initially it was a case of sign up to a survey and we'll let you know if the Oxford study gains any traction. So I kind of did it on a bit of a whim almost, sign up to something, see what happens to it. And then obviously a few months later, kind of the Oxford study gained a bit of traction, and it was one of those where you could then outwardly kind of go and fill out a survey with a lot more details to see if you could be a contender to be a participant. And when I was filling it out, and then subsequently, it was one of those things where I had it's hard to put my finger on it, but almost like a gut feel that I feel like I should be doing something to try and almost overcome the pandemic, given that I felt personally I was in a good place to do it from a physical point of view, that I hadn't suffered when I originally had COVID, so I was kind of confident in that respect. And I think just like that, I think the way I described my gut feel was originally I got turned away after a quick Zoom call with one of the study doctors because I'd just moved into a new build house and filling out some form of survey. Didn't recognise my new postcode, so it kind of defaulted me to something else for sort of a geolocation, and they originally turned me away. And I remember the feeling as soon as they ended the Zoom call was thorough disappointment. And when I looked at it and kind of realised what it'd done, I immediately emailed them back and went, please, can you do another Zoom call this afternoon, which we're happy to do, thankfully. But it was almost one of those gut feels where I went, I just feel like I should be doing it. So that was my main motivation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, strangely, I'm sure this is going to be the same across the table. A lot of what you guys both described is exactly the same motivation for myself as well. I obviously taking part sooner. I remember being in like maybe June, July time, 2020, coming out when we just came out of the first lockdown here, and I remember I literally just came across an ad for the trial on some sort of social media. I can't remember what. Similarly, again, you just fill in your name and put down your general interest down and hear something from it. And I remember, it was a bit of feeling compelled to do it, but again, almost just a whim. Like I couldn't put my name down. I thought, oh yeah, that's something to do. But like my main motivation for obviously in the grand scheme of it was, to make an impact in the pandemic. I thought if this is, as we said, if this could be the one thing I do that can make a change in this pandemic, even slight, I'm happy to do it. But as well, on a personal point of view, as Paul said, with collecting interest, which is again, I did think would be a really interesting experience myself. I remember vividly being at this point in the summer it came out of lockdown. Obviously, we didn't really know it was going to go into second or how bad it would be. But I remember looking back over lockdown, and you see all your other friends and acquaintances on social media posting, being like, "This is what I did over lockdown. This is my experience in the pandemic. Like, I made this change in my life. I did this really impactful thing." And I'm sitting there and I was literally thinking, like, I have literally pretty much sat in my room and done nothing other than, go to my part-time job in the supermarket I had at the time. So like, I felt really like just sort of, when I look back in this pandemic in years to come, what am I going to see as my kind of, if that's the thing I did during this time? And when I found this trial, that kind of became that this could be my thing. This could be my actual thing I look back on, and the challenge I went through during the pandemic and the impact I made, and going from there and getting involved with One Day and learning more about human challenge trials and actually what they do, generally outside of COVID, just in the general scheme of them, and the impact they can have generally, I became so passionate about this form of study, and then my motivation just grew completely. And again, really similar. Like I remember. Because obviously I signed up in June, July time and put my name down. I didn't hear back from them until December, I believe. I actually missed their call, funny enough. I called them back to see if we get through to it, and they booked me in for a screening in January. And between January and March, where I went in, I didn't hear anything from them at that point, just because obviously, whatever reason, busy, screenings take loads of people going through. But in that period, I remember thinking, I'm not in it. No, they would have got me. They would have contacted me by now if I was in it. Like I thought, I was thinking every reason like why I wasn't in it. I was like, I went to hospital a few months ago for this one thing. It was something really minor. I thought they found that's the reason I'm out, sort of thing like that. And I was really disappointed. And it wasn't until like 2 weeks before I went in, I got a call from them being like, "Yeah, you're successful. We want you to invite you in. Let's begin this process." And like just the joy and the relief and almost excitement to get COVID at that point. It was really weird. You know what I mean? It was quite like COVID's awful, it destroys so many lives, but like it was at this point where I was like genuinely excited to go through this. And even when I was in the trial, there's a couple of days before you're infected, because you go in, I went in the Saturday, I was inoculated on the Monday, and for those 2 days they're doing tests to see if there's anything that will still eliminate you from your previous screening back in January. And I again, they didn't tell you to the last minute you was getting infected, so even then I was like, I'm going home, this is it. Real disappointment. And when they came to tell me about an hour before I get infected, it was literally like high-fiving the doctors and nurses because getting genuine excitement to get COVID, which is really weird. But that is how passionate I became about the study and my wanting to be a part of it and believing in it as well. And I'm pretty sure we can all probably relate to that on some sort of level.
Yeah. I think after that we can probably take risks outweigh the benefits as read as part of my decision-making process. So 2 things which I think might be interesting to focus on is one, challenge studies are really difficult to recruit for. As Jacob said, there's a huge amount of waiting, there's an enormous amount of volunteers just get knocked out because there's one thing wrong with their bloods. It's really, really difficult to find people for a challenge study. The process is really long, the process is often really frustrating, and it's not, that's kind of the inherent nature of it. So like, there's actually quite a lot of like counterfactual good, like if you don't do it, no one else will, in like being aggressive and like following up really carefully with the trial team and like being there, because just there's not many people who will sign up to something and still be available for it 9 months later. That doesn't really happen, but like in challenge study recruiting, it kind of has to some extent. I actually was offered, it used to be in a phase 1 study in early 2021, and I passed that up to be in a challenge study, and I think that was the right decision. So that's one thing, is that like it's like really difficult to find volunteers, and like being enthusiastic about being in a challenge study actually really helps out and makes it significantly easier to actually do the study, which is not something you find in a lot of studies where the barrier to entry is a lot lower. So that's one thing which I thought was kind of interesting. The second thing is that it's not entirely obvious why, like at the start of a pandemic, when there's a novel pathogen and you can potentially accelerate vaccine research, it really is a slam dunk as to why you'd be in a challenge study. It's less obvious as to why you would want to volunteer for a challenge study in a world where, because we all volunteered in some time when there were like 3 or 4 really effective vaccines out there. So that's obvious to why you want to do that then. And the answer is kind of, it's still a very impactful thing to do. The data is still really helpful. The current crop of vaccines are good, but they're not perfect. And there's lots of other things that you can do with a challenge model, i.e. When you have your dose and you know how to run a challenge study with a big challenge program, there's lots of things you can do that won't happen without these initial studies. So I think they still have the potential to do quite a lot of good. They're not the kind of absolute slam dunk that they were at the start of the pandemic. It's really frustrating that they weren't done then, but they're still good things to do. And I still think volunteering for challenge study is like one of the most impactful things that anyone can do. I can't think of a thing which is like, the risk is really small. The costs are actually not that high. You have to sit in like a hospital room, but like you just get to sit there for a couple of weeks. If you can work from home, it's actually really not as bad as you'd expect. And it's, you know, the expected value is just huge. So I think it's a very impactful thing to do.
Right, so thank you. All 4 of you kind of mentioned the idea of models make a difference and make an impact. So is there anything in particular, you know, outcomes, results, that you wanted to see from the study that you participated in? Whomever wants to take the stage.
Yeah, I'll go. So, so the point of doing challenge studies is, or at least for SARS-CoV-2, the point of doing challenge studies is not so you've done a challenge study, it's that you've got like a sustainable challenge model. Vaccines are really, really difficult to test. You need to do an enormous phase 3 study, which takes months to do. It really requires some level of community transmission. It requires really unvaccinated volunteers. They're really difficult to do, they're really complex, they're hugely expensive. Challenge studies don't eliminate the need to do them, but they can make them a lot smaller. And the other thing is that with a challenge study, if you have a vaccine, particularly if it's a bit out there, like for example, if it is a universal coronavirus vaccine, which means it does more than one coronavirus, or any other reason why it might be a bit out there, a human challenge study is the only way to get efficacy numbers on paper before you do a phase 3 study, and that has the effect of essentially massively subsidising vaccine development. It's enormously de-risks the process because you have some efficacy data. You do run into limits of the challenge model. One of the bigger problems of the COVID one is that they infect you via a nasal droplet in order to try and stop establishing a lower respiratory tract infection and just keep it in the upper respiratory tract, which isn't like a brilliant model of natural infection, but it kind of is what it is. So there are limitations to the model, but it's a great way of getting some way more accurate efficacy numbers than you get from like looking at antibodies in a phase 1 or using an animal model or whatever. You can get some really good stuff out of the challenge study, so it can like significantly de-risk vaccine efficacy model. The other thing is that it's a lot quicker. You can, in particular, do challenge studies on variants. However quickly you can grow a variant for use in a challenge study is the speed limit of challenge studies. All else is bureaucracy. So the faster you can actually fund and approve a challenge study, and the faster you can grow variants, the more likely you are to be able to respond to variants with studies on updated vaccines and whatever in not exactly real time, but much more quickly than you could do in any other way, is the other kind of really useful challenge study. So those are two things which it's useful for, which it's not currently being used for, which kind of sucks. But the initial studies allow that at least to be possible.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think Alistair sort of brilliantly there what my original motivations were going forward, because like, as I said at the start, when I first went into this, I was clueless on what human challenge studies were and what the purpose of them was completely, and I learned so much about it through one day. And as I said, like the things I can use for is what we became really passionate about. Because I remember at one point, especially like, because obviously when I first signed up to it, we had no vaccines, but prior to went in, we had 3 that were, you know, beginning rolling out and were proven to be effective, which was brilliant. So I remember at that point, my mindset really moved around to, as Alistair briefly touched on, like vaccine equity, you know, globally getting equal distribution of vaccines to across the globe, instead of, you know, the nations who can have the, you know, the infrastructure and the money to, you know, vaccinate the population, doing so and leaving those who can't behind, which unfortunately at the moment is still the unfortunate case, and I'm still really passionate about that in a sense. However, as we touched on again, as I said briefly, like, you know, due just unfortunately to the timings, and it's not diminishing the impact of these studies at all, a lot of the impact they could have had has in some ways been missed, I believe, just especially in the sense of the epidemic of when it was at its worst for us anyway. So now, I suppose, looking at the question in a slightly different way, my motivation of what I wanted from it when I went in has changed to what it is now after I've been through it. And I suppose now, if anything, what I want to come from these studies is for them to be a benchmark of the effectiveness of challenge studies and what they can be used for and what they can do. And if this study can just, you know, prove that these can be such useful and impactful tools to help us fight against anything other than COVID going forward, even if it gets one more study approved, I'll really be really happy with that as an outcome from my participation in the study, and that's the main thing I would want to come from this now in comparison to what it could have been.
Yeah, so I think I'd kind of probably echo quite a lot of those thoughts. So like Jacob, my kind of background before going into trial was kind of no concept really of them, so I kind of went in with a bit of blank canvas, I guess, so I didn't really have any preconceptions on kind of what the study was there to deliver, how quickly it would deliver said outcome. So kind of originally my main motivations, I guess, for kind of going in from a results perspective were kind of on a personal level to kind of see kind of how I stood up A against the trial, and B, obviously they take a lot of, you know, tests, so to almost just see where I am. So I know a friend of mine kind of considered it as like a MOT of the body. I went, I've got no problem with doing that. So yeah, so that was on a personal level to almost go, yeah, at least I can get some results on myself from that perspective. From a trial outcome and results perspective, obviously the trial was originally kind of pitched there to, you know, test immune response, and with the, you know, potential desire to develop a blood test, for seeing how effective, you know, different people are at fighting off COVID. And to date, I know there's been a bit of a delay on Oxford kind of publishing their results. So from way back when, before I was in, I guess at this I wouldn't have kind of bothered too much about having an opinion on when they delivered their results, what they showed. Now, kind of having gone through it, if you like, I was hoping that there might be some more tangible results, I guess, to almost kind of show what I'd not necessarily given my time for, but almost just to see how effective the study was as a whole. I mean, to counter myself to an extent, I can understand why that they've delayed, or sorry, there is a delay to the results because it is a time-consuming process. I mean, alone the quarantine period is 17 days. It takes a while to get participants in, given the take-up's not very high. And kind of to Paul's point earlier, that the team do really look after you, and did. So I think at a maximum they could take 5 participants at a time, and in my being the first cohort, it was only myself and one other participant. So it's kind of that counter argument to say why they haven't produced any results yet. But I think my overall thought really is I didn't have any preconceptions beforehand, and I can understand why they haven't produced results to date, if you like.
What I resonate with strongly there is that I didn't really have any expectations, so I was a bit surprised by this question when I heard it the first time, because I realized, did they achieve a big overarching goal with this now, or didn't they? I wasn't even sure. In the research background that I kind of got into as an undergrad, it was just you sign up to your bud study so they get the numbers they need. It's just something you do. And so just helping out in science, because it is so hard, is always just helpful, and just something that just seemed like something that you just kind of do. However, I think we speak a lot about this huge impact that these studies can have, and if you ever consider doing something like that, I think it's important not to illusion yourself about how impactful the thing that you particularly do with the study you participate in will have. And I think the way I like to imagine that is just imagine 3 designers working on a problem over a day, like a logo they have to come up with or something, competing against each other, and they just take the best one at the end. So it's a high-risk job. It might be that your work just ends up in the bin, and that is what you have with every high-risk kind of project, with every high-risk research. So you don't know if the data point that you provide in the end will end up in some super good solution. But if you don't have all 3 workers coming up with their best solutions, you might just come up with one crappy one that doesn't work. But if you take 3, maybe one of them does. So with that kind of framework, I think it's like an easier way to understand how to feel that what you do is important nevertheless, or independent of what the exact outcome of your personal study outcome will be, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I will come back on that. I've got a follow-up question. During our prep discussions as well, at different points, you've all expressed to me that you've got a bit of disappointment at the lack of outcomes that we've seen, since it's almost been a year since all of you were infected. So what would you like to have seen as an outcome of the trial in order to increase its impact? Making Alistair go first.
No, you don't ask me first.
Go on.
We can just flex it.
Yes,
Yeah,
go on.
So I wouldn't say that I'm disappointed at all. What I think is it's really hard from an outside perspective to say what's reasonable to expect from something. You don't know how hard the problem is. You don't know how big the result is that they are aiming for. And I mean, it is more important and more urgent than other research that, for example, I am doing. So of course, it would be great if they just oh look, we can say this are the factors that make people get it again or not. But that's a huge ask. And I'm glad over everything they find out. But I'm happy I participated in it, even if there's 0 outcome.
Yeah, so I think kind of my thoughts on that is, like I was saying earlier, originally no preconceptions in terms of what results would come out, when they'd come out, and kind of any downstream impacts that they may influence. I think the thing that's going through my head was that, having spoken to one of my study doctors at my 6-month checkup, which was back in November, they were talking about the possibility of publishing results before the end of 2021. So for me, once I kind of heard that vague date in my head, I think I'd kind of assumed that by the end of the year there'll be some tangible results, and you can see kind of what impact personally I've had in terms of the results, if you like. And obviously there's been a delay to that, and I'm the kind of person, once I've kind of heard a date and it's gone past that, that's kind of where I suppose frustration starts, if you like. So it's possibly for me only because I heard an original date of end of 2021.
I think similarly, yeah, Paul made a really good point of back at the start, and touching again now, of not being not going in with any expectations and not being disappointed with that. And I think that was maybe possibly my mistake, and maybe Alice's too, going into it. I think we set ourselves quite high expectations for this study. I really expected a lot to come from it, and by no means am I diminishing this study at all. There still have been really valuable data that has come from this study, and I think my part in it is still really impactful, and I'm glad I did. But there's just, I wish a bit more came out. You know, for example, originally, at least one of the plans we assumed was going to happen is once they figured out a baseline dose of obviously the characterization study, we were going to go further on to a vaccine study to then develop further vaccines that could be used, as I said earlier, to enhance vaccine equity and get more vaccines globally that can be used to in the countries that aren't currently doing well in their vaccine rollout. Obviously that didn't manifest, and that's quite a shame to see. But interestingly enough, while seeing the study results as we went down to saw them when we released, it was amazing in some sense to see what our participation in and what results came out, and like some of the data we found out was really, really quite incredible in the sense of like, you know, what we learned from the study. And so that's great on one hand. On the other hand, it's just frustrating that we did not get that result sooner, because especially with this information, I'm sure I'll touch on it itself, we learned about lateral flows and the sort of effectiveness they can take on. The modelling we did with that as well, you know, they have is was really quite incredible, and not getting that sooner than we did is another great disappointment, really, in the sense of, you know, it could have had much more of an impact back then than it did currently now.
Yeah, it's annoying because you look at the data from lateral flows and it's like almost exactly what we needed about 18 months ago when we first started using them. It's like, oh, why is that not there? Yeah. So like it's like I think challenge studies. This is like not a throwaway number. I think it's my genuine feel that challenge studies in 2021 are about 5% as good as they could have been. I think if we'd run it a year earlier, it would have been 95% better. Because I think we really would have shortcut vaccine development by maybe a month, which would have been enormous. Or you could have done more jazzy things, like you could have done a challenge study and then also done a phase 3, and after the challenge study had done, you could be like, okay, this is licensed for people aged 18 to 40, and started running around giving it to healthcare workers, and that would have been brilliant. We didn't do that, which is really bad. The other thing which I'm really disappointed by, which is a bit more, is that the hVivo, which is the company which ran the study, like their stock price at the start of the pandemic went like that, and then it hit a high like a couple of days after the announcement of 48p, and I checked today and it's now worth like 15 maybe. So from approving this, like having the study actually funded, to approving the study, to running the study, to reporting results of the study, like the value of this company has like just shot down, and it's like I didn't want to see this. I want people to be really rich because they did a challenge study in a pandemic, and I want like future business people to look back and go, oh my god, they like made £1 billion company because they did a challenge study in a pandemic, and like it actually caused the company which do it to like lose 2/3 of its valuation, which is like not good, and I don't like that from a business perspective. So this is another thing which worries me. I don't know what to do about that. But I would, I frankly would have liked the people who ran the study to be really rich, and they're not, and I think that's bad. So that's another slightly odder point, but that's another thing which I'm like really disappointed and mildly worried by. So keep your fingers crossed that it starts going up again.
I I don't think that's the rest of the panelists' motivation. You know, risking your life
That's not
serving
my
to
motivation. That's not my
prices.
motivation.
Alice don't stock on the shares.
I am not. I do not own shares in the company. No, I actually joined the group chat once, and they were just like obsessed with me. They were like, "Oh my god!" I was like, "Please, no." Because they've been like posting news stories of me for months. No, this is like worse than my talk. No, I think that like, not me, but like the people who did them, like the business people who took the gamble on running a COVID study, I think they should. This should be a good business thing. Like doing a challenge study in a pandemic should have been a good thing, and like been a good business and like made them lots of money, and it didn't. And that like worries me. I think people should make money from doing good things. And this one didn't. So it's like, that's sad, and it kind of like in the future, when future business people, because business people are really important to doing studies, look and say, is it going to be financially viable to do a challenge study? They can see this graph of the stock price which goes like that and that, and that's like not good. They should see one which goes the opposite.
I think that is the point where I do agree with you there. That,
Yeah.
like, you know, for the, as I said earlier, for future motivation to do these studies, which I hope our show is it going to with the
Yeah.
with that the way it
Right.
went down, because it does all come down to the, you know, we'll just make money at the end of the day,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
If you
at
imagine
the
making
moment it
decisions-
hasn't quite shown that. So
Right,
yeah.
if you imagine like a room full of decision makers in 100 years, like you could easily imagine that the business people say there's no money to be made in it, and the ethicists say you can't infect people with a pandemic virus, and the scientists say last time we did challenge studies we didn't get any good data in time, and it's like, should we do challenge studies? No. So like challenging the idea that challenge studies have to be this slow and have to be this, I don't want to say the word's useless, but you know, this, like the fact that challenge study could lose all this value is like, it doesn't have to be that way, and it's like very important to know it doesn't have to be that way. It's just because in this pandemic we basically screwed up, and that needs to be made clear. I'd really like to make that very clear.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are running over time for our crazy amount of questions that we wanted to allow the audience. So quick fire answers. Now can we start doing? So one thing I've got is, you mentioned that you're fine doing the trials just for research purposes, you know, for science. But if researchers are asking you and other people to risk your lives, because I think, you know, you're so willing to do this, I think you forget there is a risk, and it's, you know, it's not something that actually the majority of people will be willing to do. So if they're going to request this from everyone, why don't you think that they should do it for a more important reason than just to find out what would happen?
Is there? I don't know. I think maybe it would be hard to define what the more important reason is. I think, you know, there's many ways in which our participation in this can be useful, and yes, obviously, you know, there was a risk to us. That it's not like something we're trying to deny. Although regardless of the risk itself being extremely minimal, like, you know, there's higher risk in kidney donation, which is, you know, not many people get shocked at as a concept. So it's realistically, for me, I think like the risk has its own benefits, and like if with increased risk comes increased value in data and what we've found, potentially, I think that still is worth it to me. I think there's going to, obviously, you know, there's always a limit, but I think, like, you know, there's always a point where I think it's fair to ask people to put a risk on themselves. And I think if the balance is always the benefits outweigh the risks, I think there's always a potential to go for it, and that is generally why I'm so passionate about challenge studies as a thing, because even though, you know, you say finding more about it not enough, I believe stuff that can be found out, if done at the right time, as we're discussing, can be invaluable massively.
If you don't mind, can I take that question?
Yeah, sure. I don't know, I guess like we hadn't officially reached the point of audience questions, but I'm just aware there's like only just over 5 minutes. Yeah, I guess one thing I'm curious about is like, maybe one thing that wasn't addressed is, I understand if you participate in a human challenge trial, you get quite a lot of money. And like, I'm just like wondering, like, you know, like I study like economics, and like I think like there's some economist perspective that's like generally like pretty pro, just like, yeah, well, if you, like people are willing to do things for money, then they should be able to do them. Like it's a, you know, a free world. But like, you know, some people like might not share this perspective, and I have hesitations about it too. And I just wondered if you guys, like, I don't know, as people who personally like, you know, pretty much like, yeah, put yourself at like some risk in order to like get money is like one way of framing it. Like, how do you think about this?
Can I answer this one?
I know what you're going to say, but you can answer this one. Okay, if you want.
So yeah, I think paying people for doing studies is an interesting point. I'll open by saying I gave the money away for, so well done. I think that well, I like the alternative. Like, okay, you could not pay anyone for being in a study. The trouble is then is I promise you would just not finish the study. Just no one would do it. Like in the technically. You don't actually compensate a research ethics committee sets the amount. They do not take into account the risk of the study. They take into account the time. So basically, the compensation comes from all of the hours that we spend doing the study, which does include the time we're sleeping, which is a bit. But the 24 hours a day of the study plus the follow-up appointments, they guesstimate how much time, and they pay you the London living wage for that amount of time. That's where the sum comes from. They don't compensate anything extra for risk. I think paying people to take on. I think paying people to do medical studies is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think like we pay people to take on risk. This is fine. You can literally pay someone danger money to do a more dangerous job than they would do otherwise, and it's like this is perceived as fine. I don't understand why that's different in medical studies. This is a controversial opinion. Not everyone thinks this. I think that actually the best way to go around it is a slightly odd idea of like there's quite a lot of effort expended to stop people making volunteering for studies their jobs. I think we should let people have that as a job and like give them employee benefits and protections. I think that's a good way around paying people to take on risk, but also doing it in an ethical framework. I think that's quite a good idea, but these are just my views. The only thing that I would say is if you didn't pay people for studies, you just wouldn't fill them. If nothing else, there's not that many people who can just take 2 or 3 weeks out of their lives and just do a medical study. There's just not many people out there who can do that, and paying people lets most people be able to afford that. So, like, whether you pay people for studies is a bit maybe it would be a better world or like more ethical study or something if you paid people £0, but you wouldn't get the study done. So it's a bit of a moot point, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because having spoken to my study doctor about kind of the compensation payments, I think some studies that she'd run a little while back kind of paid participants kind of mostly up front, and then they saw a lot of drop off from participants because they received most of the money, and kind of follow-up appointments were almost not worth their time. So like, I know the way the Oxford study was done, you get a good chunk of it after the 17-day quarantine, so much after the 1, 2, 3, 6 month, and then another fairly sizable chunk after the 12 month to almost keep participants in, because of what they've found that participants kind of did drop out if you paid a load up front, which kind of does hint towards that, that some people, I guess, are driven by the money. Personally speaking, it wasn't really about the money, but I mean, not to Alice's generous nature, I didn't give all of it away. I won't lie about that. I gave a chunk of it away and put some towards friends, family, and then put the rest towards a holiday. But I know my own personal feeling, and again, I've got kind of a mathematical background, so I kind of sat there for a little while thinking, how much would I have done it for? And I've got no problem saying that the entire pay packet or compensation packet rather, for the Oxford study was just short of 5,000. And I remember saying to one of my study doctors, don't get me wrong, I would not have done it for free, but I probably would have done it for £12.50. I just remember thinking that, for me, it wasn't really about that wasn't even intended to be a joke, so I'm not back my name. But I think think the point that it does bring out, it's something we before discussed on a call for the week about the efficacies of challenge studies is, does the compensation money blind people into doing challenge studies? So there obviously are people out there that I guess would look at the money first over the risks associated. And I personally, for me, like I said, wasn't about the money, and I looked at the risks and I was fairly confident in that I wasn't at risk, if you like. But it does bring about that efficacy point as to, do some participants know what they're signing up to because they're blinded by that?
Is there a mortality rate or any symptoms of a virus that would mean you would not volunteer?
I suppose it's hard to say without seeing it. But again, my answer really is what I've already said, that like it would depend on what, I know we can't always see, but it would depend on what the planned outcome is. If, as I said, again, repeat myself, if increased risk, increased mortality, increased high risk of symptoms means that they're going to get better, increased data, or we're going to find ways to fight and treat a more serious disease in the community globally, then potentially no. I think it'll be the risk-benefit way up for me. That would actually be my decision-making point in the end, rather than the actual individual mortality rate or symptom risk.
Sorry, we've run out of time, but we will be around afterwards for a little pizza station, so we're happy to take anything on that. But thank you so much again, EA Oxford, for hosting us. I hope you found it interesting. Yes, thank you very much.